She was but a young girl, fewer than 10 years of age, when from the assembled crowd, the Pontifex Maximus designated her as the next Vestal. From that exact moment, her life ceased to be her own in any meaningful way, selected not for influence, affluence, or aspiration, but for her innocence and fate. She undertook a duty that tied her to Rome more deeply than any emperor or senator. What could possibly motivate the Romans to surrender their young daughters to a life of sanctified captivity? The choosing of a Vestal Virgin, known as a Virgo Vestalis, was a ceremony both deeply solemn and dreadful. The chosen girl had to be between 6 and 10 years of age, with both parents still living, hold Roman citizenship, and be entirely free from any scandal. Moreover, she was required to be physically flawless and born of a lawful marriage, serving as a symbolic mirror of Rome's own ideal purity. The young girl would stand among others, from whom the Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of Rome, would select her, either by casting lots or by direct appointment. This selection was not an honor that all families welcomed. Indeed, many families shed tears, not of pride, but of profound and utter terror. Upon being selected, the girl was quietly led away. She would walk along the Sacra Via, the sacred way, for the final time as a simple child of Rome. Henceforth, she belonged entirely to the goddess Vesta, with her body and her very soul becoming the legal property of the Roman state. The ancient biographer Plutarch, in his work The Life of Numa, narrates how King Numa Pompilius established the order of the Vestals, entrusting to them the sacred flame and selecting them from among Rome's nobility. This was far more than a mere religious obligation. It constituted a significant act of the state, imbued with solemn ritual reverence and bearing the immense weight of Rome's moral expectations. The Vestals resided within the House of the Vestals, the Atrium Vestae, located immediately adjacent to the Temple of Vesta in the Roman Forum. There, under the stern supervision of the senior Vestals and the priests, she was bound to serve for 30 years, 10 years dedicated to learning, 10 to practice, and 10 to instruction. Her responsibilities were not solely religious. They were profoundly political, for the sacred flame she was tasked to maintain symbolized the very eternal life of Rome itself. Furthermore, her personal chastity was viewed as a direct and immediate reflection of the moral integrity of the entire Roman state. These young women were not bound by physical chains, but by laws more unforgiving than any prison, and once she was chosen, there was never any turning back. There was no going back to her family, nor to her given name, and most painfully, never back to her former life. Service to Vesta remade her into an icon, a living symbol of Roman virtue. Yet, beneath the veneer of public adoration, lay a much more somber reality. The city would continue to adore her, but only as long as she committed not a single error. The most binding rule of all, however, was the one that governed her own body. The vow of chastity sworn before the goddess Vesta could never be revoked. For a period of 30 years, it was forbidden for a Vestal to marry, or even to touch or be touched by any man. This was never a simple religious doctrine. It was considered a crucial matter of state security. Her body was considered sacrosanct, and the purity it embodied was not just personal, but deeply political, reflecting the severe justice and brutal discipline of Rome. Though she was sacred, she was never truly safe. The Vestal Virgin, clad in ceremonial white and venerated by the populace, existed under a divine obligation, but also beneath the constant pressure of Roman law, which was both unyielding and absolute. Though publicly revered, she was privately under strict surveillance. Her sanctity was ultimately safeguarded by methods that were far more brutal than they were divine. What would occur if the most revered women in all of Rome were to make a single mistake? The Vestals were bound by 3 essential foundational principles: perpetual virginity, unswerving obedience, and the diligent guarding of the sacred flame. Should any one of these laws be broken, the consequences were swift and frequently merciless. If the eternal flame within Vesta's temple were ever to be extinguished, it was considered more than a mere ritual failure. It was interpreted as a dark omen for the entire Roman state. In such instances, the responsible Vestal faced a private punishment, which could include being scourged by the Pontifex Maximus himself, always conducted far away from the public eye. This chastisement was by no means symbolic. It was a truly brutal and degrading ritual, carried out in complete darkness, usually at night, designed to shield the holy woman from the public gaze, even as she endured her suffering. Ancient historical sources confirm that when the sacred fire went out, the Vestals were sometimes beaten with rods, an act always performed in darkness and never before the public. It served as a stark reminder of the chilling balance maintained between ritualistic dignity and harsh physical violence. Beyond mere physical punishment, their psychological isolation was both constant and deliberately enforced. Throughout the entire 30 years of her service, a Vestal was required to remain celibate, with her life strictly confined within the Atrium Vestae, an isolated compound located on the Roman Forum. Her social interactions were meticulously monitored. She was not even permitted to speak freely with men. The slightest whisper of any impropriety was enough to launch a full investigation by the College of Pontiffs. And once she was formally accused, a Vestal Virgin possessed virtually no effective defense. In such matters, Roman justice seldom, if ever, presumed the innocence of the accused. To be a Vestal did not mean she was free from suffering or fear. It meant inhabiting a sacred cage, where she was worshipped at altars, yet punished in utter silence. Buried alive in complete silence, this was the Roman ritual for a bloodless execution. The Roman Republic prided itself on its laws, its moral virtue, and its absolute discipline. Yet, when a Vestal, the very embodiment of virtue, was suspected of violating her vows of chastity, Roman justice transformed into something silent, solemn, and utterly cruel. It was an appalling punishment defined by its silent ritual, where not a single drop of blood was shed. Nonetheless, a life was thereby completely and irreversibly extinguished. What Roman crime necessitated the interment of a living body? This offense was termed incestum, a sacred desecration, the defilement of Vesta's untainted purity. If a Vestal was found guilty of betraying her oath of chastity, the sentence was neither torture nor the sword, but a ceremonial burial while she was still alive. This method was devised to avoid spilling her sacred blood, thus constituting an immaculate execution. This punishment remained exclusively reserved for the most revered women in all of Rome. The ordeal of the Vestals in the year 216 before Jesus Christ is regarded as one of the most detailed and tragic examples of Roman jurisprudence. According to Livy, 2 Vestals, Opimia and Floronia, were condemned by the College of Pontiffs on the charge of incestum, which was the violation of their sacred oaths. Their trial was conducted behind closed doors, and all record of any defense has since vanished. From the moment their guilt was declared, their fates were sealed. One was buried alive, the other took her own life. The rite commenced in absolute silence. There were no cries, no protests. The condemned Vestal would cross the Roman Forum in a somber procession, draped in white, barefoot, and veiled like a bride being led to her wedding. However, this was not a marriage ceremony. It was her funeral. The procession came to a halt at the Campus Celeratus, the Field of the Wicked, located just beyond the Colline Gate. There, a chamber had been prepared, excavated deep within the earth. Inside were placed a bed, a lamp, some bread, water, and milk. These were tokens of a minimal existence, sufficient to pretend her death was not state-sanctioned murder. It was claimed she was not executed, but rather given over to the gods. Once she had descended the steps, the entrance was sealed over with earth and stones. No one would ever hear from her again. The state did not acknowledge this entombment as an assassination. By supplying provisions, Rome could assert she was simply being confined underground. Nevertheless, there was no possibility of escape, no rescue, and no legal appeal. When her air eventually ran out, her life was extinguished, and with it, any doubt about Rome's capacity to anchor brutality in the name of virtue. The ritual never involved a public spectacle of death. That was its very purpose. The silence was a weapon as formidable as the grave, intended to erase the fallen Vestal from memory. Her name, her reputation, and her entire existence lay sealed beneath the soil. The fate of the Roman Vestals reveals a civilization prepared to sanctify innocence, yet swift to punish imperfection with ruthless precision. Venerated as divine symbols, but cast aside at the slightest accusation, these women stood at the intersection of religion, law, and power. They were not merely entombed under the earth, but also beneath the immense weight of the empire. In the shadow of such rituals, we must ask ourselves, what does a society lose when it sacrifices humanity for the sake of purity? Please comment below. As Thucydides once observed, The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. We should contemplate this lesson with great care